something that was a little happier. But we do need to start with you on what's happening in Eastern Europe. The world is on edge as the crisis in Ukraine is intensifying this morning. Russia is tightening its hold on the country, it seems. President Biden meeting with his National Security Council this morning, in fact. The U.S. reiterating its support for Ukraine, warning of swift and severe consequences if Russia launches an invasion. But just moments ago, Vice President Kamala Harris talked about the gravity of the situation as she sees it.
We're talking about the potential for war in Europe. I mean, let's really take a moment to understand the significance of what we're talking about. It's been over 70 years. And through those 70 years, as I mentioned yesterday, there has been peace and security. We are talking about the real possibility of war in Europe.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says his country is preparing for whatever comes. Though he says he's grateful for support from the United States and its allies, he's calling for proposed sanctions against Russia to be made public now. He questions how effective they would be after the Kremlin invades.
Go.
And this is an example of just how tense things are in Ukraine right now. A CNN team and other journalists that were accompanying Ukraine's interior minister on a tour of the front lines in the eastern part of that country came under mortar fire yesterday. We're fortunate to report that no one on the team was injured. Our correspondents are covering the latest developments in this evolving crisis with live reports from the Munich Security Conference and from Poland near the Ukraine border. Let's go first to CNN international security editor Nick Payton-Walsh. He's live for us from Rzeszów, Poland. Nick, you've been monitoring the situation in nearby Ukraine. What is going on there where you are?
Well, it's still deeply tense inside Ukraine. The defense ministry there reporting 20 ceasefire violations just the first 11 hours today, fitting into a pattern basically of that supposed line of control falling apart, intense shelling being reported there over the last hours. Add to that too a warning from Munich from the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson that the plan he has seen, he said, for Russia's invasion would be a war not seen in Europe since 1945. Other suggestions too, possibly about Russia's intentions, coming from an announcement at the end of joint military drills they've been doing with their neighbour Belarus. The troops have been there for a number of weeks. They were supposed to go home, but instead they've said they will be continuing readiness checks. Essentially, they're saying evaluating the outcome of those exercises, which basically means those troops will stay in place longer. All of that bad news for those hoping that diplomacy might take a role here. Clearly, the talk, frankly, increasingly of escalation and the hours being counted down to what many fear may be ahead. Boris?
Well, and I want to ask you, Nick, the U.S. accuses Russia of spreading disinformation. We know that. And they say it's to create a pretext for invading Ukraine. How is that affecting the people there in eastern Ukraine right now? And how are they receiving that?
Well, essentially, it's a barrage of highly confusing, often entirely false information. And we've seen this many times before, where Russia begins to sell a narrative of its people being under attack. A lot of that is using false video, and we're seeing it persistently every hour now, rising that narrative, and it's always deeply concerning for those observers because it suggests a direction in which Moscow expect things to go. Here's our report. Wars come with their own fog, chaos, phone lines down, panic sowing confusion. But in eastern Ukraine, that fog has long been fanned, amplified with false narratives, critics say, part of Moscow's strategy.
We have reason to believe that they are engaged in a false flag operation to have an excuse to go in. Every indication we have is they're prepared to go into Ukraine, attack Ukraine.
Sometimes it is easy to spot. A separatist leader, Denis Pushilin, called on citizens in the separatist Donetsk People's Republic to flee Friday's escalating violence into Russia. But the video file of this speech, which mentioned Friday's date,
сегодняшнего дня, 18 февраля,
was in fact created on Wednesday, according to its metadata.
вопреки здравому...
A similar speech from the neighbouring separatist area Luhansk had the same timing issue. So, unless the same technical fault occurred both times, both leaders seemed to know midweek how bad things would get by Friday, making the call for civilians to flee a lot less spontaneous. Then an explosion hit the city of Donetsk, separatist media said. They showed this military jeep destroyed. Nobody was harmed, but the apparent blast fed a narrative of violence mounting around the separatists. Then there is the mass exodus of civilians from separatist areas, planned for hundreds of thousands, but so far a lot less. Pictures on Russian state TV. They get 10,000 rubles or $130 on arrival in Russia, and however many really arrive, it is the sort of pretext Russia used in the past to justify assisting separatist rebels. This video is quite dramatic, and separatists said it was of clashes with Polish saboteurs trying to blow up an ammonia storage plant on Friday morning. But the video's metadata shows it was created about 10 days earlier, another technical fact that doesn't fit the separatist narrative. A separatist news crew was at hand too to capture this, another blast at a pipeline. The cameraman could have miraculous timing, or it could fit into the slow pattern of misinformation, which grows often in advance of the violence in eastern Ukraine and provides a signal of what is to come, the direction in which the fog of war is being fanned. Nick. Boris, Christie, it is troubling every morning to wake up and see these narratives continually form. More videos emerging this morning suggesting that the separatist areas are under attack. That is staunchly denied by, frankly, eyewitnesses, Ukrainian government as well. There's no real both sides to this. It's just misinformation, and it's persistent. What it does do is show the direction in which Russia may want this conflict to go, and that is a dark place indeed. On this day too, 8 years ago, in which we witnessed ourselves gunfire in central Kiev that began this troublesome journey towards violence in Ukraine. Deeply sad that we're seeing similar fears today again.
Very good point. Nick Peyton Walsh, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.